In a quiet town in Nebraska, far from the bright lights of big cities, a man named Matthew Carter spent most of his nights staring at the stars. He wasn't an astronaut or even a scientist, just a curious person with a love for the unknown. Every evening after work, he would climb up to the roof of his small house, where he had built a homemade radio telescope. It wasn't fancy, but it worked well enough to pick up faint signals from space. One chilly night, as the wind gently rattled the metal parts of his equipment, Matthew noticed something strange. His machine was picking up a signal, but it wasn't like anything he'd ever heard before. The sound came in bursts, short pulses followed by longer ones, almost like a pattern. At first, he thought it might be interference from Earth, maybe a satellite or some secret military project. But the more he listened, the clearer it became that this was different. The signal repeated itself over and over again, too precise to be random. Matthew's heart raced. Could this really be what he thought it was? A message from another world. He quickly recorded everything, making sure not to miss a single detail. When dawn broke, he rushed inside to show his sister, Laura. She was a journalist who wrote stories for the local newspaper, and though she didn't share his passion for astronomy, she always encouraged him. "Laura, you have to hear this," Matthew said, pulling her into his cluttered living room. He played the recording for her, explaining how unusual it was. Laura tilted her head, listening carefully. "It does sound weird," she admitted. "But are you sure it's not just some kind of natural phenomenon?" "I don't think so," Matthew replied, shaking his head. "This is deliberate. Someone, or something, sent this." Though skeptical at first, Laura couldn't ignore how serious her brother seemed. If there was even a tiny chance this could be real, she knew they had to investigate further. Together, they decided to reach out to someone who might understand what they were dealing with. They remembered Dr. Harold Finch, a retired astrophysicist who lived on the outskirts of town. Though he rarely spoke to anyone these days, he had once been known for his groundbreaking work in radio astronomy. When they showed up at his door unannounced, Finch looked surprised but intrigued. After listening to the recording and examining Matthew's notes, he grew quiet. Finally, he spoke. "This isn't noise, and it's not coming from Earth." His voice was calm, but filled with awe. "You've found something extraordinary." Over the next few days, Finch helped them refine the data, confirming beyond doubt that the signal originated from deep space. Word began to spread around town about Matthew's discovery. Some people were excited, while others dismissed it as nonsense. But one thing was certain: life in their sleepy little corner of Nebraska would never be the same. As Matthew lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever, or whoever, had sent the signal was still out there, waiting. Months passed since Matthew Carter's discovery of the strange signal from space. Life in the small Nebraska town had returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after news of the mysterious transmission spread. People talked about it occasionally, but without any updates, most went back to their daily routines. Matthew, however, couldn't stop thinking about it. He spent hours analyzing the data, searching for clues that might reveal more about its origin. Then, one evening, something extraordinary happened. The sky lit up with an eerie glow as massive ships descended silently into Earth's orbit. They hovered above cities across the globe, their metallic surfaces shimmering like liquid silver. Panic erupted almost instantly. News channels scrambled to cover the event, showing footage of people pointing at the sky, crying or running for shelter. Governments issued statements urging calm, but no one knew what to expect. Matthew and Laura watched the scene unfold on TV, their hearts pounding. "This has to be connected to the signal," Matthew said, his voice trembling. Laura nodded, though she looked pale. "But what do they want? Why are they here?" The next day, the ships began broadcasting images and symbols worldwide. At first, the messages seemed random: geometric shapes, swirling patterns, and unfamiliar characters. But as scientists worked tirelessly to decode them, a pattern emerged. The symbols appeared to form a language, one designed to communicate rather than intimidate. World leaders called for experts to step forward and help interpret the aliens' message. Matthew knew he had to act. With Laura by his side, he traveled to Washington, D.C., where teams of linguists, physicists, and engineers were working around the clock. When Matthew presented his original recordings, the room fell silent. His data matched parts of the aliens' broadcast perfectly. After weeks of effort, communication was finally established. The aliens identified themselves as the Veil, a highly advanced species seeking knowledge. Their tone was calm and measured, assuring humanity they came in peace. Yet, despite their words, unease lingered. Something about the Veil felt unnatural. Their voices, transmitted through translators, lacked emotion, making it hard to trust their intentions. As days turned into weeks, the Veil continued their broadcasts, sharing glimpses of their civilization. They showed images of towering structures, endless fields of glowing plants, and vast oceans filled with bioluminescent creatures. Humanity marveled at their achievements, yet questions remained. Why had they chosen Earth? What did they truly hope to gain? Matthew and Laura found themselves caught in the middle of it all. Government officials relied on them to bridge the gap between humans and the Veil, often asking them to relay questions or explain technical details. While Matthew embraced the responsibility, Laura grew increasingly uneasy. She noticed subtle inconsistencies in the Veil's behavior, delays in responses, shifts in their tone, and moments when their messages seemed incomplete. One night, unable to sleep, Laura sat alone in her hotel room, staring out the window at the glowing ship hovering over the city. Her mind raced with doubts. Were the Veil really harmless, or was there something darker lurking beneath their polished exterior? She decided then and there to dig deeper, even if it meant risking everything. When she shared her concerns with Matthew, he hesitated. "We don't have proof," he said, "and we can't just accuse them without evidence." But Laura insisted. "That's exactly why we need to find out more. If something doesn't feel right, we owe it to everyone to figure out why." Reluctantly, Matthew agreed. Together, they began gathering information, piecing together fragments of the Veil's transmissions and analyzing every interaction. What they uncovered would change everything, not just for them, but for all of humanity. As weeks turned into months, the Veil's presence on Earth became a part of daily life. Their massive ships still hung silently in the sky, casting long shadows over cities and towns. People grew used to seeing them, though the fear never fully disappeared. Governments worked closely with the aliens, trying to understand their goals while keeping the public calm. Matthew and Laura remained at the center of it all, helping translate messages and acting as intermediaries between humanity and the Veil. Then, one day, the Veil made an unexpected request. Through their broadcasts, they explained that they wanted to study human emotions, specifically fear. This announcement shocked everyone. Why would such an advanced species care about something so basic? The Veil claimed they had no concept of fear themselves. They described it as a mystery, something unique to humans that fascinated them deeply. To understand fear, they said, is to understand your strength. The request sparked heated debates worldwide. Some argued it was harmless, a chance to learn from the Veil in return. Others saw it as dangerous, fearing the aliens might use this knowledge against them. Despite the controversy, volunteers began stepping forward, lured by promises of payment or curiosity about the process. Facilities were set up near the Veil ships, where experiments started almost immediately. Matthew and Laura watched uneasily as people entered these facilities, unsure what awaited them inside. At first, reports seemed positive. Participants spoke of strange machines that scanned their minds and bodies, capturing their reactions to various stimuli. But soon, things took a darker turn. Some volunteers emerged pale and shaken, unable to speak about what they'd experienced. Others refused to leave the facilities, claiming they felt different afterward. Laura decided to investigate further. Posing as a journalist covering the story, she visited one of the sites where the experiments were taking place. What she saw chilled her to the bone. Inside, rows of chairs lined the room, each occupied by a person wearing a headset connected to glowing wires. Monitors displayed graphs and numbers, tracking every heartbeat and twitch of muscle. Technicians moved quietly among the participants, adjusting settings on the machines. When Laura asked to speak with someone in charge, she was introduced to a Veil representative. Its voice, filtered through a translator, sounded calm and detached. "Fear is powerful," it told her. "It shapes your actions, drives your survival. By studying it, we seek to understand not just you, but ourselves." Despite the explanation, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She noticed how exhausted the technicians looked, how quickly they avoided eye contact when questioned. Later, she shared her concerns with Matthew. "They're hiding something," she said firmly. "I don't trust them." Matthew wanted to believe the Veil's intentions were pure, but he couldn't ignore the growing evidence. Reports of psychological trauma among participants increased, and some even died during the procedures. Public outcry followed, with protests erupting outside the facilities. Governments tried to reassure people, but tensions ran high. One night, as Matthew sifted through documents related to the experiments, he stumbled upon something alarming. Hidden within the data were references to amplification protocols, methods designed not just to study fear, but to intensify it. His blood ran cold. If the Veil weren't careful, they could unleash something far beyond their control. He showed the findings to Laura, who nodded grimly. "We need to stop this," she said, "before it's too late." Together, they vowed to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Little did they know, their discovery would put them directly in the path of danger, and force them to confront the true nature of the Veil's mission. Matthew and Laura knew they had to act quickly. The more they uncovered about the Veil's experiments, the clearer it became that something sinister was happening. They couldn't sit back and let the aliens continue their work unchecked. After discussing their options late into the night, they decided to take matters into their own hands. The next day, Laura used her connections as a journalist to gather information about one of the Veil's research facilities. She learned that the site was heavily guarded but not impossible to infiltrate. With Matthew's technical skills and her knack for persuasion, they devised a plan. They would pose as maintenance workers, sneaking inside to see what was really going on. Dressed in plain uniforms and carrying fake identification cards, they approached the facility early the following morning. Their hearts pounded as they passed through security checkpoints, but no one questioned them. Once inside, they split up to cover more ground. Matthew headed toward the main lab area, while Laura stayed near the entrance to keep watch. What Matthew found inside chilled him to the core. Rows of glass pods lined the walls, each containing a human subject hooked up to wires and tubes. The people inside looked terrified, their faces frozen in expressions of pure panic. Machines hummed softly, extracting some invisible force from their minds and bodies. It was horrifying, like watching fear itself being drained out of them. As Matthew moved closer, he noticed screens displaying data about the subjects. One readout caught his eye. Emotional output amplified. It confirmed his worst fears. The Veil weren't just studying fear. They were harvesting it and making it stronger. He snapped photos with his phone, knowing they needed proof to expose the truth. Suddenly, a voice echoed behind him. "You are not authorized here." Matthew froze, turning slowly to face a Veil representative. Its metallic form loomed over him, its glowing eyes unblinking. For a moment, he thought it was all over. But instead of attacking, the alien tilted its head, studying him curiously. "Why do you resist?" it asked. "Do you not wish to understand?" Before Matthew could respond, Laura appeared, pulling him away. "We need to go, now," she whispered urgently. Together, they ran through the corridors, dodging guards and slipping out a side door. Once outside, they didn't stop until they reached their car. breathing heavily as they sped away. Back at their safe house, they reviewed the evidence Matthew had collected. The photos and documents painted a grim picture. The Veil weren't just curious about fear, they were weaponizing it. Armed with this knowledge, Laura wrote an explosive article exposing the truth. Within hours of publication, outrage swept across the globe. Protesters flooded the streets, demanding an end to the experiments. But the Veil didn't back down easily. In response to the backlash, they issued a chilling statement. Fear is universal, they said. It connects all living beings. To suppress it is to deny growth. Their words only fueled humanity's anger, pushing tensions to a breaking point. Matthew and Laura realized they couldn't rely on governments or protests alone to stop the Veil. They needed a way to fight back directly. With the help of Dr. Finch, who had been quietly researching the aliens' technology, they began working on a plan to disrupt the Veil systems. Using Matthew's recordings and Laura's investigative skills, they hoped to turn the tables on their otherworldly visitors. Though exhausted and scared, the siblings refused to give up. Humanity's survival depended on them, and they were determined to rise to the challenge. As they worked late into the night, one thing became clear. The battle against the Veil was far from over. But if anyone could find a way to win, it was Matthew and Laura. Matthew and Laura spent days preparing for their next move. With the help of Dr. Finch, they studied the Veil's technology closely, looking for weaknesses. The aliens' machines were advanced, but Matthew noticed something important. They relied heavily on signals similar to the ones he had first intercepted. If they could hack into those signals, they might be able to disrupt the Veil systems. Dr. Finch introduced them to Alex, a young hacker with a sharp mind and a rebellious streak. Alex had been following the situation closely and was eager to help. Together, the group came up with a daring plan. They would create a fake signal designed to confuse the Veil's equipment, feeding it false data that mimicked human emotions, but twisted in a way meant to trigger fear in the aliens themselves. It was a risky idea, but it was the best chance they had. To execute the plan, they needed someone brave enough to get close to the Veil ships. That's where Ryan came in. A former soldier with experience in covert operations, Ryan agreed to join their team after hearing about the atrocities happening inside the facilities. If anyone can pull this off, it's us, he said confidently, though his eyes betrayed his nerves. The night of the mission arrived quickly. Under the cover of darkness, the group traveled to an isolated area near one of the Veil ships. Matthew carried a small device loaded with the fake signal, while Ryan kept watch, ready to protect them if things went wrong. Laura stayed behind, coordinating their efforts via radio, and Alex monitored the signal transmission from a safe distance. As they approached the ship, its massive form loomed above them, cold and unyielding. Matthew felt a lump in his throat, but pushed forward, focusing on the task at hand. Using a handheld device, he connected to the Veil's external communication array. His hands trembled as he uploaded the fake signal, praying it would work. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, the ground beneath them began to shake. Lights flickered across the surface of the ship, and strange sounds, like metallic groans, filled the air. Suddenly, the ship's engines roared to life, sending shockwaves through the area. Matthew and Ryan stumbled back, shielding their faces from the blinding light. From a distance, Laura watched anxiously through binoculars. "It's working," she whispered into the radio. The Veil ship hovered uncertainly before retreating higher into the atmosphere. Moments later, other ships around the world followed suit, pulling back into deep space. Humanity had won, for now. Back at their safe house, the group celebrated quietly, knowing their victory might only be temporary. Dr. Finch examined the data, confirming that the fake signal had overloaded the Veil systems, causing chaos among their ranks. But he warned them not to let their guard down. "They'll regroup," he said gravely, "and when they return, they may not be so forgiving." Matthew sat alone later that night, staring at the stars. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had only delayed the inevitable. The Veil were still out there, watching and learning. Laura joined him after a while, sitting silently by his side. "Do you think we scared them enough to stay away?" she asked softly. Matthew hesitated before answering. "Maybe. Or maybe we just gave them something new to think about." He smiled faintly. "Either way, we showed them what humans are made of." As the two siblings gazed up at the sky, the weight of what they'd done settled over them. The battle was over, but the war for Earth's future had only just begun. In the weeks that followed the Veil's retreat, life on Earth began to settle into a fragile new normal. The massive ships no longer loomed over cities, and people cautiously returned to their routines. Yet the scars of the aliens' visit remained, both in the memories of those who had suffered through the experiments and in the lingering questions about what might come next. Matthew and Laura found themselves at the center of attention once again. Their bravery had inspired millions, and they were hailed as heroes. News outlets clamored for interviews, governments offered them awards, and strangers stopped them on the street to thank them. But despite the praise, neither Matthew nor Laura felt like celebrating. They knew the Veil weren't gone for good. Somewhere out there, beyond the stars, the aliens were regrouping and planning. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the siblings sat together on the roof of Matthew's house. It was the same spot where everything had started months ago with his homemade radio telescope. "Do you think we'll hear from them again?" Laura asked, breaking the silence. Matthew sighed, leaning back on his elbows. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I do know one thing: they won't forget us." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Dr. Finch, carrying a thick folder filled with papers. His expression was serious as he joined them on the roof. "We've been analyzing the data from the night of the attack," he explained. "The fake signal didn't just confuse the Veil, it frightened them. For the first time, they experienced something they couldn't control." Laura frowned. "But why would fear scare them? Isn't that what they came here to study?" Finch nodded slowly. "Exactly. Fear is a human emotion, tied to our survival instincts. To the Veil, it's alien, literally. When we turned their own curiosity against them, it must have felt overwhelming." Matthew leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "So, are you saying we actually scared them off?" "Not permanently," Finch replied, "but enough to make them rethink their approach. They underestimated us, thinking we were weak because we feel fear. What they didn't understand is that fear makes us stronger. It drives us to fight, to protect what matters most." The revelation gave Matthew and Laura some comfort, but it also brought a fresh wave of worry. If the Veil returned, they would be better prepared. And next time, humanity might not get so lucky. Months passed without any sign of the Veil. People began to relax, convincing themselves the danger was over. Then, one day, a message arrived, not from the skies, but through diplomatic channels. The Veil wanted to talk. They proposed a meeting in neutral space, far from Earth, to discuss a treaty. World leaders debated the offer, weighing the risks and benefits. In the end, they agreed, but only under strict conditions. Humanity demanded guarantees that the Veil would never attempt such experiments again. Matthew and Laura were invited to join the delegation traveling to meet the aliens. Though nervous, they accepted, knowing this could be their chance to ensure lasting peace. When the day came, they boarded a spacecraft alongside scientists, diplomats, and security personnel. As they approached the designated meeting point, a barren moon orbiting a distant planet, they caught their first glimpse of the Veil ship in months. The meeting itself was tense. The Veil apologized for their actions, claiming they had misunderstood humanity's nature. "You are unlike any species we have encountered," one of them said through a translator. "Your courage in the face of fear, it is extraordinary." Though skeptical, the humans accepted the apology and negotiated terms for a formal agreement. The Veil promised safe passage through the solar system in exchange for leaving Earth alone. Both sides signed the treaty, marking the end of hostilities, for now. As the delegation returned home, Matthew and Laura reflected on what had happened. They had faced unimaginable odds and emerged victorious, but at a cost. The world had changed forever, and they knew the Veil's fascination with humanity wouldn't disappear completely. Back on Earth, as they stood together under the starlit sky, Laura spoke softly. "Do you think they'll come back someday?" Matthew smiled faintly. "Probably. But if they do, we'll be ready." Months after the treaty with the Veil, life on Earth began to heal. The scars left by their experiments slowly faded as people rebuilt their lives and focused on moving forward. Matthew and Laura returned to their quiet town in Nebraska, but they couldn't shake the feeling that their story wasn't over. The Veil's parting words echoed in their minds. "You are unlike any species we have encountered." Though the aliens had promised peace, their fascination with humanity remained an unanswered question. Matthew spent his days tinkering with his radio telescope, scanning the skies for any sign of activity. He told himself it was just a habit, a way to stay busy. But deep down, he knew he was waiting. For what, he wasn't sure. Laura, meanwhile, threw herself into writing articles about resilience and courage, inspired by the events they had lived through. Her stories resonated with readers around the world, offering hope in uncertain times. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Matthew called Laura outside. "Look at this," he said, pointing to his telescope. Through the lens, a faint signal flickered, weak but unmistakable. It wasn't like the one they had discovered before. This one felt different, almost hesitant. Laura stared at the readings, her heart racing. "Do you think it's them?" she asked quietly. Matthew hesitated. Maybe. Or maybe it's someone else entirely. They debated whether to share the discovery with anyone. After everything they'd been through, the thought of involving governments or scientists again felt exhausting. But they also knew they couldn't ignore it. That night, they reached out to Dr. Finch, who agreed to help analyze the signal. Days turned into weeks as they worked together, piecing together fragments of data. The message slowly became clearer. It wasn't hostile, but it was urgent. Finally, they deciphered enough to understand its meaning. "We see you. We remember." The words sent chills down their spines. Were the Veil watching them? Or was this another species, drawn by the conflict between humanity and the Veil? As news of the new signal spread cautiously among trusted experts, Matthew and Laura found themselves pulled back into the spotlight. This time, however, they weren't afraid. They had faced the unknown once before and emerged stronger. Whatever lay ahead, they were ready to confront it together. In the end, the Veil's greatest lesson to humanity wasn't about fear itself, but about how it shaped them. Fear had pushed Matthew and Laura to take risks, to fight for what mattered, and to stand up even when all hope seemed lost. It had revealed their strength, not just as individuals, but as a species. On a quiet hilltop one night, Laura looked up at the stars and smiled. "You know," she said, "if they ever come back, I think we'll surprise them again." Matthew nodded, his eyes reflecting the distant glow of the cosmos. "Yeah, because that's what we do best." And somewhere far beyond the reaches of Earth, the Veil watched silently, pondering the enigma of humanity, the one thing that terrified them the most.